So, on yet another message from Our Lady, and again on the theme of evangelization and loving the LGBT community. My children, as your mother, my greatest desire is to bring you to Jesus so that you can experience his love and plans for you and your loved ones. Jesus, my children, is infinitely loving, infinitely merciful, infinitely understanding, and has the most wonderful and fulfilling plans for each and every one of you. My children, how much it grieves me that so many of my children do not know Jesus at all, while so many others who do know him so often misrepresent him. My children, Jesus thirsts for souls, especially for broken and misunderstood souls, and there is no shortage of these souls among the LGBT community. How can you say you love your neighbour if you do not reach out to your neighbour? How can you say that you love your neighbour if you refuse to talk and listen to your neighbour? How can you say that you love your neighbour if you refuse to ask your neighbour for forgiveness? Yes, my children, you must make the first step, and my priests and my bishops must actively and courageously reach out in love, mercy, and truth to the LGBT community. They must acknowledge the way the Church has hurt and wounded LGBT people generation after generation and ask for forgiveness publicly, while doing everything in their power to love and welcome these people. My children, you must pray fervently for your church leaders and not criticize them, even if they make mistakes. This is an area of mission for these times, and I, your Heavenly Mother, am leading it as I lead these souls to the loving heart of my Son Jesus too. Well, what a beautiful Jesus-centered message. The message ends and begins with Our Lady's desire to bring souls to Jesus. It is basically as simple as that. It's all about Jesus, Jesus' love for us, Jesus' plans for us, and each and every one of us getting to know Jesus and getting to experience his love at a personal level. And at the start, Our Lady says, Jesus, and of course, Our Lady knows Jesus better than any other creature. Jesus is infinitely loving, infinitely merciful, infinitely understanding, and has the most wonderful and fulfilling plans for each and every one of you. And I just think that's so amazing a statement, I'm going to read it again. Jesus is infinitely loving, infinitely merciful, infinitely understanding, and has the most wonderful and fulfilling plans for each and every one of you. Now, some people might think, well, I'm old and I'm going to die soon. What good is that to me? Well, guess what? His plans continue on into eternity. So it's great good for you. So keep on going. But then Our Lady goes on to say, how much it grieves me that so many of my children do not know Jesus at all. So there she's referring to people that are atheists, that people don't believe in God at all, people that go to church and don't know him at all. While so many others who do know him so often misrepresent him. So in other words, even people that do know him a little bit, and then often totally misrepresent him and talk about him in a way that frightens other people away. We've seen that in the past, for example, when people preached a lot about this God of anger and God of justice, rather than this God of mercy and love. And of course, there is a justice component too, but justice is linked to love and mercy, not this angry, crazy, despot God that wants to smite us all. And then she goes on to talk about the gay community, basically. That Jesus thirsts for souls, especially for broken and misunderstood souls, and there is no shortage of these souls among the LGBT community. Well, we all know that because when we're praying Divine Mercies, for example, we always say, and especially those in most need of thy mercy. And we all know that Jesus, he went after the lost sheep. He always reached out to the lost, to the broken, to the marginalized, to the misunderstood, to the lepers of his time. So that's just a characteristic of Jesus. Even to Sister Faustina, he revealed the same thing. The souls they thirst for the most were the ones most deserving of his mercy, were the most hardened and worst of sinners, sort of thing. So Jesus has basically an extra big thirst for the worst of the worst, the broken of the broken, the weakest of the weak, the misunderstood of the misunderstood. And Our Lady is saying, if you want to find lots of those people, And those type of people, well, go to the LGBT community, you'll find them there. Then she says, how then can you say you love your neighbour if you don't reach out to your neighbour? How can you say that you love your neighbour if you refuse to talk and listen to your neighbour? How can you say that you love your neighbour if you refuse to ask your neighbour for forgiveness? And this is the challenging part, she says. She goes on to say, which we all know anyway, that the church in generations past has wounded and hurt the LGBT community. Now, albeit it mightn't have been done deliberately, LGBT issues have never really been spoken about publicly. It's not like Jesus left a full A to Z guide of how to do pastoral care for LGBT people in the tomb. So there are lots of reasons why in times past the church didn't know what to do with LGBT people. But regardless, the reality is LGBT people have got very hurt and very wounded. And even, for example, the Catechism mentions stuff about homosexual acts being intrinsically disordered, but it also goes on to mention about the love and respect for LGBT people, and that all unjust discrimination and all these type of things shouldn't exist. And yet, unfortunately, in many cases, unjust discrimination has existed and even still exists, and often still exists even in the Catholic Church. And so Our Lady isn't condemning the Church, but Our Lady loves the Church, but yet Our Lady knows that the Church isn't perfect. And so Our Lady is urging priests and urging bishops to ask the LGBT community for forgiveness for the places where the Church has wounded them, forgiveness for the places where the Church has lacked pastoral care, where the Church has basically condoned and done very little at times to reach out to LGBT people. Now, asking for forgiveness from the LGBT community, by the way, doesn't mean that all of a sudden we open up wide the doors to LGBT people and they can invade the church and do what they want. That's not what asking forgiveness is about. But asking for forgiveness is about acknowledging our part, or the church's part, in the problem. And you see, Our Lady is saying that because the church and we as Catholics or whatever, we're the ones going to Jesus. We're the ones praying. And that's why Our Lady wants us to be the ones to make the first step. Because it does say that, to those people who receive a lot is expected. Now we could say, well, why don't they come and ask for forgiveness for all the horrible things they've said about the church? Well, they might do one day, but that's their business. But Our Lady is saying, but we are benefiting from the prayers, from the masses, from knowing Jesus' mercy. And as a result, then Jesus is expecting more from us. And so Our Lady then goes on to say, you must pray fervently for your church leaders and not criticize them, even if they make mistakes. And I guess in this area, she's probably talking about the Pope and bishops, but especially the Pope and bishops who are doing their best at the moment to reach out to LGBT people. And I suppose there are two extremes. One extreme is to do nothing and to condemn LGBT people and to want nothing to do with them. And another extreme then, of course, is basically to totally and utterly change church theology and to basically allow everybody in and to have no discernment or no filter whatsoever. And neither of those, to be honest with you, are holy. One is the sin of omission and the other is basically would be sins of commission. But Our Lady is saying that we must pray, because regardless, it's a very difficult, tricky situation. And as I said, God does not appear before people and give a big user manual of what to do. In times past, and we know how the Holy Spirit works, the Holy Spirit works in these areas of grey, the Holy Spirit works in these areas of growth, and that's why Our Lady is asking us to pray, not to judge and not to criticize, even if people make mistakes. And finally, she ends by saying, this is an area of mission for these times, and I, your Heavenly Mother, am leading it, as I lead these souls, the LGBT souls, to the loving heart of my Son, Jesus too. So Our Lady is reassuring us and saying that this mission is coming from her. This mission is not somehow inspired by Satan to destroy the church, to destroy the family and let all the LGBT people into the church. No. There will be more than enough straight people to populate the earth afterwards as well. So don't worry. The church and the world isn't going to depopulate just because a few gay people are going to church. So Our Lady is saying this is from her, and she's leading it, she's guiding it, and she needs us to listen to her. She needs us to open our hearts, and she needs us to reach out and love, truth, forgiveness, pastoral care, prayer, listening, dialogue, and all sorts of things to the LGBT community. Why? To bring more and more people, and especially people in the LGBT community, to the loving heart of Jesus. Because at the end of the day, it is all about Jesus. So on that note, have a Jesus-filled day, have a great day, and pray for me, and also pray for our priests, our bishops, and the LGBT community, that more and more LGBT people will find home, will find happiness, will find love, will find joy, will find community, will find acceptance, will find healing and health and all sorts of wonderful things in our Catholic Church. Thank you.